VX3 are specialists in cricket kit, both on-field and off-field. Utilising their in-house design team, they can create your team an entirely bespoke cricket kit, including any colours, patterns, or incorporating any images you desire. Your on-field cricket kit can be entirely unique to your club. Not only that, but they have a huge range of off-field and training wear in stock where they can add your club badge as well. Available in 20 colours that have your cricket team's colours covered. They also have off-the-shelf, quick turnaround cricket whites in stock, ready to personalise with your team or club's badge and sponsor logos. Head to VX3 to find out more. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. We are down to the final four teams at the T20 World Cup. We'll be previewing the semi-finalists today, talking a bit about what went wrong for some of the teams that didn't make the final four, as well as all the other going-ons in the world of international cricket this week. I'm Rana, and with me today is a magazine editor at Wisden Cricket Monthly, Joe Harman, the editor-in-chief of Wisden Cricket Monthly, Phil Walker, and Mark Butcher. So we've got Pakistan, New Zealand at Sydney on Wednesday, and then India versus England at Adelaide on Thursday. We'll start with the second semi-final. England were pretty unconvincing in victory against Sri Lanka, but their recent record chasing is really not very good. Their recent record setting is very good. How can a team be so good at one of them and not so good at the other? Microphone.
I have no idea. Hello, microphone. Hello, everybody. I don't know. I mean, there seems to be a sort of a hesitance, perhaps, when chasing that wasn't a hallmark of Owen Morgan's teams, and they, perhaps some of the pitches haven't been particularly good. In fact, some of them have been downright poor in the tournament, and we'll probably get onto the fact that the semi-final is going to be on a used pitch at some point during the chat. But England certainly seem to be less jittery when it comes to setting than they were chasing in the past, and I have no idea why that is particularly. I still have a theory that with all of the batting resources that they've sort of had over the course of the tournament, that you can get to that point where you're complacent enough to kind of allow somebody else to take it on. I think that some of the options they've taken when chasing recently have not been particularly good. Let's face it, England haven't been staring down the barrel of 9s and 10s, and perhaps if they were staring down the barrels of 9s and 10s, they'd chase it better. It just seems to me when the game is there to be won, and we got off to a terrific start as they did against Sri Lanka, and then suddenly the run rate comes down to less than one a ball. They don't really know what they're doing, and thankfully Ben Stokes went in there and reprised the World Cup 2019 final run chase and just sort of dead batted the ball into gaps and ran his backside off. And in doing so, you then end up getting the odd bad ball to smack away for four. So look, I don't know if that's not a particularly good answer as to why it's happening, but you would feel a damn sight happier about England winning the game if the coin came down the right way and they batted first in Adelaide on Thursday. That's for sure.
Joe, so it's a little caveat on England's chase, which was nervy, and at one stage it looked like they might actually blow it. But I think I'm right in saying there's only been one successful chase at Sydney in this World Cup, which was that chase. So it's not an easy ground, it's not an easy pitch to chase on. I think that will be a big factor in the Pakistan-New Zealand game as well. I think the toss of the coin will go a long way to deciding that game when you look at the makeup of their sides as well. So England have struggled with it, but I wouldn't read too much into that game, and they did get through it. And that,
except for the fact they did the same thing, chasing a low total in a rain-affected match against Ireland only 2 weeks or 10 days before.
Sure, that looked like bad strategy.
And did it twice in Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, that looked like bad strategy against Ireland.
I'll just keep throwing examples, eh?
Don't confuse him with facts.
No, there are plenty of examples, but I think Sydney, we shouldn't look too much into that, because that's been a tricky pitch to bat on in this tournament, particularly when you're chasing.
I think Joe's being quite generous there, personally. I could not believe what I was watching, right? Just bring up the scorecard again. England was 75 for 0 in 7.2 overs when they lost the first wicket, chasing 144.
It was 70 for none after 6.
Right, okay. So they lose Butler 75s, sort of clothed it to deep mid-wicket, but all right, he's got to 25 odd and they're obviously cruising. Hale's got out fair and square, slightly unluckily. Toe-ended one, caught and bowled. But then this middle order behaved skittishly, overly aggressively. Harry Brook, who I think is a brilliant young cricketer, came in, tried to reverse sweep his second ball, looked completely ill at ease and totally inappropriate, really, to the occasion. As Stokes, as Mark says, is composed, sitting on his back at the other end. Brook goes, Livingston comes out, tries to leather it again out the ground. No, the ball is nowhere near to play that shot. Now, if he does, we go, okay, you know, what a talent, what an eye. Totally inappropriate shot for the occasion, completely. And then Moeen comes in, chips one to extra cover, but by this point, the wheels are definitely coming off. And if it hadn't been for Stokes's further proof of why he is in this team, I don't care how many T20 games he's played in the last 18 months or what his average is. This is why he's in a world tournament. This is why he needs to bat in that slot. And it was justified come the end. But my word, how they could have made a balls up of that to that extent. It may well just be a one-off. I'd said before that game, I wanted them to bat second because in a game where you have to win, I wanted them to know what they needed to do and so on. And we thought that run rate might come into it at one point. But it is a bit alarming. I think that there's a clarity when they bat first and there's a muddiness when they bat second in that middle order. You know, if they're chasing, then those sort of alpha batters in the middle order, I'm not entirely sure that they're particularly sure of how they need to go about playing the situation rather than expressing their machismo all the time.
Well, as Mark said, they're almost more comfortable chasing none over than six.
Yeah.
There was a point where, not at 70 for none, but there was a point where I was thinking, well, they still do need to forget run rate. They just actually need to score 70 more runs between numbers 3 to 7. And with the way those guys are batting, like you can actually see them not scoring 70 runs between them. And in those situations, it was when Woakes came out, I was like, I feel calm now that Woakes has agreed.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like he's in number 8 or 9. It's like he actually exudes more calm than numbers 4 to 8.
This is a total non sequitur, right? But the 1983 World Cup final, India beat West Indies. Edit this out. India beat West Indies. India got 180 against the greatest team that ever was, and West Indies were bowled out for 140. And the theory goes, if India had got 250, then the West Indies would have won the game because they'd have thought, all right, well, somebody's got to get their head down, somebody's got to bat, and then we'll play around them. If they'd got 240, 250, West Indies would have won the game. But chasing 180, they didn't because it was almost beneath them. And there is sometimes that feeling in cricket matches, that these sort of peculiarly smallish targets can sort of garble the brains a little bit of players who go out and play on instinct.
I think 180 on that pitch would have been a really, really difficult chase. I think it was a difficult pitch against some good spinners.
But where in those wickets, what wickets can you identify as the pitch doing the job for the bowlers? And
well, it's not the wickets necessarily, is it? It's a build up of pressure. So they were struggling to score runs and then played silly shots. So but Livingston's shot, he picked the wrong ball to play it. But when Stokes was playing the anchor role, I don't think trying to hit a 6 at that point was a bad thing necessarily, apart from the fact he chose the wrong ball and didn't pull it off.
But they had 7 overs at that point to get fewer than 40 runs when Livingston clothed one up in the air.
Yeah, but quite a lot of batting still to come at that stage, and Stokes settled.
The interesting thing on Stokes...
You are in a good mood this morning.
The interesting thing on Stokes that he's getting a lot of praise after the game, but he did actually have a couple of moments where he very nearly got out playing similar shots to Livingston. And it was almost when he realised that the game was in jeopardy, I said it on the Daily Pod, it was almost like Stokes entered World Cup mode for the first time, like 2019 World Cup mode. He's like, right, I am going to be the guy who makes sure we win this game, which that's the biggest plus that England could possibly want.
I think you're absolutely right, but I also think that by accident, they've now got the right lineup, and that whatever they do in terms of replacing Dawid Malan, who's going to struggle, whoever they bring in, and it'll probably be Phil Salt. I doubt that they'll go to Chris Jordan, give themselves another option at the death. Although that's probably the way that I would go. If they bring Phil Salt in, I want to see him batting below Moeen and Liam Livingstone. I don't want to see them put him or drop Hales, because Hales and Butler have just started to get a thing going. I don't want him to slot in there at 3 either.
Totally.
I want to get if Ben's going to play, and this was kind of my point right from the beginning about the 2 left-handers, either Stokes or Malan. You take your pick, and obviously Stokes would always come out on top during that conversation. But it then allows Ben to go in and have more time to play, and it gives all the people coming in behind him more time too. But if you go Malan 3, Stokes 4, all of a sudden those guys coming behind have got less and less time. Yeah. So if they do bring in Phil Salt, which I think they're probably going to do, What do you think? I think that's probably what
I think it
they'll go.
seems most likely.
Most likely, they'll keep the same bowling options that they've got. But I don't want to see him get in front of all of the other guys. That would be a mistake, I think.
We got an email, didn't we?
I was just about to read it out.
Yeah, read that out because he did a follow-up email, sort of apologising for sending the initial one. I think the first one has validity.
I replied to him saying exactly that. So Q wrote in to say, if Milan's tournament is over, might Liam Dawson be a good option against India? India have a top order of 6 right-handers. He can bowl stump to stump, forcing them to play to the long straight boundaries. He is way more accurate than Livingston, who might struggle with the ball with the short square boundaries. I know it'll never happen, but could it work? He then sent us a follow-up email, as Phil says, basically apologising for the question, saying no need to talk about that. But I was like, no. The more I think about that,
more
I think
sensible
that's
questions we
also-
get.
I think
That
that's
is
a pretty
definitely not a terrible shout.
Used pitch, crabby pitch.
The tricky thing with that though, Nawson's not in the squad as it stands. So he's a backup player, so they would have to give up on Milan playing in the final, remove him from the squad, bring in Dawson. We don't know in what state Milan is in, but if he could play in the final, you want to give him every single chance to. So that's the difficulty. Other than that, I think there's a lot of logic in that decision.
There's a lot of logic, but unfortunately not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
But it's a good call.
And then the chat on Twitter today has been that it's been confirmed that the semi-final Adelaide is going to be played on a used pitch. Chris asks, are England's chances of winning significantly reduced by playing on a used pitch? Should knockout matches always be played on fresh pitches? Butch, what do you reckon? What does a used pitch mean for how the cricket will be affected?
Well, number one, the big 3 matches of the tournament should always be played on fresh pitches. End of. No excuses. I'm trying to remember whether or not, because I remember watching the back end of the New Zealand-India World Cup semi-final from Old Trafford and thinking, my God, that's a dog of a surface. And it sort of sparked up a conversation that went on forever and ever about pitches. And I think that was a used one. It might not have been. If it wasn't a used one, good grief. It was one of the worst starting ones you'll ever see. Yes, knockout matches should be played on pitches whereby the toss of the coin becomes less of a factor, because of course, the pitch was a used one at Sydney in the match against Sri Lanka. All of those games in Sydney is that the blocks are pretty small in Australia, so as you go along, they tend to get very tired and really favour the teams setting a total, which is what our friend Joe has been talking about in terms of how difficult the run chase was. So that's not what you want in the semi-final. You do not want the coin to come down and everyone go, oh, crikey, 150 will be a decent pass score, then you struggle to get there. Sometimes that's very exciting for the fans, or at least the last 5 or 6 overs of those games are very exciting for the fans. But in terms of it being sort of a fair contest where the toss of the coin has less of an effect, it isn't right. And of course, people will say, India and their spinners and all that kind of stuff. Well, England have actually bowled more overs of spin in the tournament than India have.
Rashid bowled beautifully against Sri Lanka, having had a little bit of criticism, which I thought was a bit unfair.
Well, because he got tagged for those sixes by Glenn Phillips, didn't he, in the New Zealand game, having had him dropped of the absolute dolly, which perhaps would have made everything a lot more or less stressful. So in terms of actually favouring India's makeup, the makeup of their team or their personnel, I don't think it does particularly over England whatsoever. I suppose you could argue that India would be more suited generally or brought up on pitches where the ball might hold a little bit more than England. But again, I'm not sure that there's a massive amount of evidence for that in the modern era. I think England play the turning ball as well or as badly as India do nowadays. So it's just be a shame if that became a talking point for what is a titanic contest there in Adelaide.
Before we started recording, Mark asked whether the 2019 semi-final pitch was used or not, so I googled it, and the first web story I clicked on had a tweet embedded from Mark's Twitter account that just said, sorry, but pitches have been garbage this tournament.
Well, he's consistent.
They were. And I don't think they've been that great for this one either.
We've also just got a reply from Hugh. So I said to him, it's a good question. We're going to talk about it in the pod. And he said, thanks. I was thinking that England only really bowl Moeen to match up despite bowling really well this tournament. If only we had a left-arm spinner, ... But sometimes I wonder if I have an overblown opinion of Dawson. I have a friend who thought Ryan Bertrand was much better than he was and was always adamant he should be in every England squad. So I worry that Liam Dawson is my Ryan Bertrand, which is excellent. I guess the other thing for that semi-final is that the pitch dimensions are a bit different. So short square boundaries and long straight boundaries, which apparently means you've got to bowl more Yorkers and fewer into the pitch stuff. But England have been bowling a lot of into the pitch stuff, so I don't know how that will affect things. Anyway, Phil, what's your moment of the week? Dare I ask?
I'll try and be brief. Well, it began. My moment of the week is Saturday last week. Began with that Sri Lanka game. Watched it all. Then actually waiting for my mate to pick me up. He's always late, and he was 2 hours late this time. So I watched The Greatest Game, the account of the 2019 World Cup final, and I actually thought it was a really brilliant piece of work. Have you seen it? The Sky
No,
thing?
I've seen bits and pieces.
You've seen it,
It's a
Joe?
Yozza production, isn't it?
Yeah. So Simon Hughes has written it. It's really nicely done. They go back to Owen Morgan's family home back in Dublin, shows where he learnt the game on a little kind of grassy knoll by the back of his house, and they take certain kind of trips out with different players back to their backgrounds and so on. So it's really nicely done, actually. So I found that quite powerful. Put me in good form. Got in the car, drove down to Bournemouth, saw Bob Dylan play at the Bournemouth International Centre. That was an almost religious experience. You saw him up in Nottingham, Mark.
I did, and the same.
Did you
yeah.
find a similar?
I thought it was the only. I suppose my only gripe would be that the Nottingham Arena was perhaps a little bit bigger than some of the other venues that he's been playing on the trip, so it was a little bit less intimate. But it was still magnificent, and Al and I very much enjoyed it, and Rioja, I seem to remember.
I've got various tales from that, but I'm going to keep it brief. As I said, you know me, brevity as ever. And anyway, then stumbled back to the Airbnb about 1ish, 2ish in the morning. Stuck the iPad on, saw that the Netherlands were turning over South Africa, and I beat the bookies for 10 minutes. I put £3 down at 275 to 1, Bangladesh to win the tournament.
Because if Netherlands won that
Netherlands
game,
won and they beat Pakistan, they're in the semi-final. I wasn't thinking entirely cogently at that point because they have stunk the whole tournament out. But then I also thought £3, and we'd also managed to blag around £36 round of gin and tonics at the venue, which we couldn't pay for, and they said just have them anyway. But that's another story. What a day! Anyway, so I watched those 3 games play out over the course of the night. Turned in about 6 or 7 in the morning. £3 poorer, but. Having had a glorious,
you were right.
Glorious day.
I was very generous definition of beating the bookies.
So no, what I'm saying, listen, what I'm saying,
Before the odds
275
changed.
to 1, 275 to 1. 10 minutes later, Joe, it was 30 to 1 to win the whole tournament, right? So I could already cash out quite a lot, even on a £3 bet.
Okay.
I didn't, because I'm a natural optimist. Always back the Tigers. And then they were 70
round
for
of gin
1.
and tonics.
They were 70 for 1 in 9
every
overs.
podcast we've done, we've said what a poor T20 side they are.
Yes,
But
I'd forgotten that.
You lumped on with your £3.
I'd forgotten that at the time. I think the experience of seeing the great man
It was
my otherwise
every grain of sand.
ramrod straight rationale.
that's more of a day of the week rather than
A day of the week,
it's a very good day.
Yeah.
Back to the cricket. Joe, India topped Group 2, but they weren't that convincing themselves. They only just beat Bangladesh last week. They lost to South Africa. How do you see that game going from like an India perspective?
I think India are favourites. They look a more complete, smoothly functioning team to me. But like you said, it's been far from serene progress so far. On a used pitch, I do think that the toss is that feels the more decisive thing than which side is better at this point, because the two sides are fairly evenly matched, which isn't how it should be at this stage in the tournament. As Butch says, these should be fresh pitches, clearly. Sky and Kohli are in fantastic form. They're clearly the 2 big wickets they need to get. The one for me who's slipped a bit under the radar after getting a few runs against Pakistan is Hardik Pandya, who hasn't really come off since then, but has been in unbelievable form over the last year.
What's a cricketer?
Won the IPL, has been in fantastic form. We saw him in a T20 over here just dominate the game against England. So he would be, besides Sky and Kohli, who are obviously the 2 big wickets, he'd be the one I'd be worried about from an England perspective. He's bowled nicely as well. He's picked up wickets, but quite a quiet tournament with the bat. And at the start, I picked him out as someone who I thought could be the one to end this long winless streak for India in major tournaments. And I still think he might have something to say about it.
I think it's bubbling up nicely for India. Rahul had a very quiet start to the tournament. He's made back-to-back 50s. If Sharma, who got hit in the nets this morning, if he's fit, he's due. in fairness, but he's obviously a huge.
That also
big
means
match
that he's
player.
out of form. If he's due, that means he's not doing that.
Sure,
well.
but law of averages, good player. Law of averages, I always fall back on that. I would say India by a nose.
Yeah.
At this point.
Just on Suryakumar Yadav, he's totally ridiculous at the moment. So in 2022, he averages 45 in T20Is at a strike rate of 186. So his average innings is 44 off 24, which is totally absurd.
We need a cricket viz person here, don't we? But are we getting into kind of all time? Has anyone been able to do that?
Go on, give him a nod.
We're looking at it yesterday. So AB de Villiers had basically a 7-year streak in the IPL where every IPL he averaged more than 35 at a strike rate of more than 150. So there's that. But
Gale at his peak as well must have.
Yeah, I guess different role, but yeah, Gale at his peak. But so Cricket has actually done a piece for us that's going up today on like how good is Sky, what makes him really good, and how do you bowl at him. Against pace, he has a strike rate of over 130 in every zone they've got. So no matter where a quick bowls at him, he strikes at least 130. So he almost literally doesn't have a weakness.
He hasn't faced Liam Dawson yet.
But he hasn't faced Liam Dawson yet.
The Cincinnati kid
Or Ryan
will
Bertrand.
sort him out. Sammy Curran will sort him out. Don't worry about that.
Anyway, somehow Pakistan qualified for the semi-finals after the Netherlands beat South Africa and Pakistan beat Bangladesh. Pakistan fans are getting really excited by the parallels between this World Cup and the 1992 World Cup because both of those World Cups were in Australia. In both World Cups, they lost to Australia in the semi-finals in the previous World Cup. So in 1987, Pakistan lost to Australia. In 2021, Pakistan lost to Australia. On both occasions, Pakistan lost their first game at the MCG. They lost to India in the group stage. They won 3 games in a row at the end of the group to qualify for the semi-finals. Both times they faced New Zealand in the semi-finals, and not explicitly related to Pakistan, but in the tournaments, South Africa got screwed over by the rain and DLS a little bit.
And
there you go.
It's a 30,
give them the trophy now.
Give the trophy now.
30-year gap.
I think my favourite thing about Pakistan this week is that Nasser Hussain was trending in Pakistan because Pakistan fans believe that Pakistan do better when Nasser is on commentary, which isn't the first time Pakistan fans have had theories on how commentators impact their team. So a couple of years ago, someone did a study, but like a long Twitter thread on how when Ramiz Raj is on commentary, Pakistan do worse. and it's like the equivalent of losing a wicket at the start of every stint with Ramiz Raj on commentary.
Fantastic.
So depending on the ICC commentary rota.
Do we know if Nasser's on, which game he's on?
Oh, he'd probably be on the England game, wouldn't he?
won't he?
Of course he will, yeah.
So bad news for Pakistan in the semi-final then.
At least Rambo won't be on.
Yeah, that's true. We went to print on the magazine on Wednesday evening, and it's out in a couple of days. And we were previewing the Test series against Pakistan, England, and I wrote, "So much flows from the imperious bat of Babar Azam, and I fear that their disastrous World Cup campaign and Babar's own travails will hang heavy on his head. I later described them as a bruised team that will be vulnerable and under pressure after such a botched, disastrous World Cup campaign. They're going to win it, folks."
Well, I mean, the thing is that Shaheen Shah Afridi sort of started having spent the whole of the England series back here in London trying to get his knee/hamstring injury sorted out, and he started off the tournament unbelievably rusty, didn't he? I mean, he looked sort of a shadow of himself in the
10 mph down, wasn't he?
India game, as you would do. I mean, he just hasn't played. 4 for 22 against Bangladesh. It looks like he's starting to come to it. And Rizwan and Baba, who haven't managed to get out of the third over, I don't think, managed to scratch a few runs together against Bangladesh. It all looks like things are moving in a decent direction for them. And of course, New Zealand's, most recent outing, was it the most recent one? They got England turned them over.
Yeah.
New Zealand had the opportunity to knock England out of the tournament and kind of fluff their lines a bit. And so you just wonder. You wonder. New Zealand have reached the semi-final, of course, as we said they would at the beginning. Gets right that one off.
Consistent team, New Zealand overall.
Yeah, I guess it's quite. They peaked at the very, very start. So in the last week, they lost against England, and then they beat Ireland. That's kind of it. So I guess the momentum isn't quite with New Zealand.
You don't feel like that
was.
batting lineup. And Phillips has been fantastic, but aside from that, Conway started well but hasn't made a score since. It doesn't look like a batting lineup that scares you, but they're just always in the game, aren't they? They're just always at you. It's one of those ones. If England do get through to the final, you'd think they're probably favourites against either side, but I would still probably expect them to lose against either of them, just based on recent history. If Pakistan gets to the final, it feels like they'll win it, just if they've got that far.
Yeah.
But they've had a whole kind of change of strategy, which has been forced upon them by the fact that Rizwan and Babra haven't been getting any runs. Suddenly, this middle order, which looked like nothing against England, is now carrying them through. The question is, are Babar and Rizwan going to come good? And if they do, are they going to do it at a rapid enough pace that's not going to affect the middle order? Because again, at Sydney, you need that game showed Sri Lanka and England both scored so many of their runs in the power play. They're going to have to come out hard. It's not really Rizwan and Babar's style. And they could end up causing issues for a middle order, which suddenly looks in quite a good touch.
I mean, the emergence of Mohammed Harris is sensational. He wasn't even in the squad a week ago. He's only ever played 5 PSL games. He's an opener. I think he's only faced like 15 balls in the PSL, not in the power play. And now Pakistan decided that he should come into the team, but not as an opener. And he's hit 28 off 11 and 31 off 18 in a pair of wins, which is just vintage Pakistan, isn't it?
And Masood is their top scorer in the tournament,
and
opener again in the middle orders. They basically got 4 openers.
We have 4 openers.
And
Shadab Khan's been brilliant as well in the last couple of games.
On Mo Harris, that's the name of Big Mo in EastEnders. That's her surname.
Big Mo, is it? Yeah.
Big Mo Harris. But anyway, whatever plays out, whoever wins this thing, it's a brilliant story. It's been a triumphant tournament. Forget the rain. It's been a triumphant tournament anyway. And you make a lovely case for any 4 of those victors. If it's India, then they're due. They're magnificent. They've been waiting for far too long to win a world title again. That would be huge. If it's England, then they're double winners, first time ever. Yet they hold both trophies at the same time. If it's New Zealand, then finally they can exercise the demons of 2019 and so on and so on. And if it's Pakistan, it's Pakistan. So however you play it, it's a great story. We've got the semi-finals that the tournament deserves, I think.
Just on New Zealand, I think some quotes from Kane Williamson this week, and he's basically talking about how New Zealand are very confident and very good at reading pitches and very good at communicating to their own team during a match that this is what the pitch is doing. So as a bowler, this is what you should be doing, or when they're batting, this is what par is if they're batting first. I guess with them having had so much success over the last 6 years in white ball cricket, there must be something like that which makes them better in tournament cricket than other teams.
Well, we saw, that England game, New Zealand should have won that, really. 5 overs to go. I made New Zealand favourites, marginal favourites, but favourites nonetheless. And again, I think they read the situation really well right until the last, and then just lost key wickets at the wrong time. But that's, still a really dangerous team.
And in that New Zealand-Ireland game, it's worth mentioning that Josh Little, who's had a really good tournament, got a hat-trick.
Yes. He's fabulous, him. Every time I watch him, he picks up wickets and he surprises people. He'll pick himself up a few quid over the next bunch of auctions in the T20 tournaments around the world.
He's in my fantasy team, Josh Little, right from the start.
Did anybody read the stuff? Sorry, I read the stuff about the US Major League yesterday, or I read something last night. That's rather exciting, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of like, bloody hell, another one, but imagine if that
market is huge.
Yes.
It's already huge.
Yeah.
It's obviously untapped, but a lot of the traffic that kind of comes through Wisden.com, it comes from North America. I know Cricinfo has a large chunk of its own traffic through North America. So, it's a sleeping giant without a doubt. It could be huge for the game financially, but also the game's broadening growth, over the next 10 years.
Joe, what's your moment of the week?
Mine came from the Australia-Afghanistan game. Really exciting game. Actually, Australia just squeaked over the line, but obviously wasn't enough to keep them in the tournament. But the big news, and that match was covered in our daily podcast, but the big news from that match was that Mitchell Starc got dropped by Australia, which I think took a lot of people by surprise. Stuart Broad was saying on Twitter, I can't believe he's been dropped. An experienced seamer, why would you ever drop your experienced team? I don't know where he was coming from there.
Never.
And I think that selection did take a lot of people aback, because it was not long ago that Starc was, in the sort of stratosphere of Shaheen and Bumrah where they are now as, T20 gun. But he's taken an unconventional route, and he hasn't played a domestic T20 since 2015. He's only played international T20s. He's focusing on Test cricket, where he's been brilliant for the last 12 months. And I think there's a lot of admiration for what he's done, and a lot of people would like to see other fast bowlers do that. The flip side is now we're seeing he's not the T20 bowler that he was, which is not surprising given he doesn't play it as much, and given the fact that the other fast bowlers play it all the time, and they're a lot of specialist skills that you obviously have to keep working on. The result is he's been dropped from the sides, and now Mark Ramprakash wrote a column for the last Wisden Cricket Monthly talking about his fears about the future of fast bowling in Test cricket. Essentially, why would you bother in Test cricket, putting your body through it when there's this money to be earned in T20 cricket? Well, Stark's gone the opposite way, and might have ended up damaging his chances of getting big paydays at franchise. I mean, he'll still be clearly in demand, but not to the same level. So whilst we're kind of happy to see that someone like Stark has decided to do that, it also serves as a bit of a cautionary tale for other quicks. Are they going to want to go that route, or are they going to want to go with T20? And it's it's a bit depressing, but it is the reality.
I guess it's not that dissimilar to the path that Stokes has taken, and actually it's seeing that it's taken him a few games into the tournament for him to get to the level where he can be, and it's so far it's kind of worked for England. But you could see that Stokes is probably one bad game away. If he didn't get that 40 against Sri Lanka, England possibly knocked out, with Stokes having done very, very little in the tournament. So I guess that is a risk. And yes, T20 cricket.
I mean, but the other side of that, from the Test cricket point of view, is it's interesting that the two players you mentioned are two players for whom the money is extremely good to do whatever you want to do.
Sure, yeah. He's not struggling whichever way he goes, is he?
But players from anywhere other than England, New Zealand, and Australia, they would be unlikely to make the same choice, which is where the danger to Test match cricket comes. And it's another thing about the US League. Whilst it's brilliant for the reach of the game, it might be very, very bad for the long form of the game.
Ben's not on this show, obviously, but he did a very funny tweet after that game. So an Australian journalist called Lachlan McCurdy tweeted after during the England Sri Lanka game, Lorcan Tucker will never have to buy another beer for his life if he's ever in England. His innings at the Gabba is the reason there are no net run rate concerns in this match. To which our very own Ben Gardner replied, trying to imagine Lorcan Tucker actually attempting to buy a free drink or get himself a free drink in England. Yeah, I'm Irish. I played this innings against Australia. It helped England qualify for the T20 World Cup semi-finals on net run rate. Some random guy in the pub. Mate, what the fuck are you on about? But
he's been doing some tweets.
He's good on the Twitter.
Yeah, he's doing that.
He's been a lot less spiky recently. He's going down the gentle humour route.
He is the sardonic side.
There you go. There you go. There's a lesson there for everyone,
but
especially Elon Musk.
But what's your moment of the week?
Has he banned
my
you yet?
moment of the week? Not been banned yet. No, I'm trying.
Yeah,
I'm still trying.
Sticking.
What's he doing? Anyway, moment of the week: Roloff van der Merwe. Roloff van der Merwe in conjunction with Ian Smith. Greatest catch of the tournament and a brilliant piece of commentary was the passport. They say he's old, but the legs are still young or something, because he sprinted back and caught David Miller. An absolutely extraordinary grab that consigned South Africa to yet another gas-taking extravaganza. It was only a couple of weeks back that everyone was saying, not everyone, but all those people who were being kind enough to forget that this is what happens to them in major tournaments were saying that they look like the best team in it. So that was one heck of a moment for old Rolly.
Does this South Africa one even count as a choke though? It's kind of a pre-choke, isn't it? They didn't even get to the moment where they could choke.
Well, I mean, look, the game was
kind of complacency,
they had to
isn't
win. They had to win the game. It might as well have been a semi-final or a final, right? If it's a game you have to win, and you're playing against a team that you would be ranked, goodness knows how many places above, having played the best cricket in tournaments that you can remember South African teams playing for a long time, having beaten England here in a T20 series, having a bowling attack that everyone's saying, wow, these are the guys that are going to carry off the tournament. I think that counts.
I guess so. It didn't feel like there was a lot of pressure going into the game, did it? Until they lost it, and then it was.
But that's the point, isn't it? They still had to win the game. I mean, it was a knockout, and they got knocked out. They got knocked the F out.
I don't understand how it happens. Like, when they're playing, are they aware? Are they thinking of Alan Donald in 1999? Like, why does that history affect them every single time?
I think the South African teams carry it with them, and I also think, and this kind of drills down into South African cricket in many ways. all of the fault lines that are in there about whether or not they think Temba Bavuma should be the captain of the team, whether or not they feel that certain players are only in the side because of quotas, all of these things, when it comes down to it, when the pressure's properly on, that's when they can't bring it all together. They can't all be together and play as a team or get over the line as a team because they don't really believe they are one. You know, when things are good and when you're not under the pump massively, those things you can paper over those sorts of cracks, but they become like the Grand Canyon when you're right up against it, and that's what happens to them. I mean, that wasn't the case, but you know, this all started, I suppose, back in '99 and all that kind of stuff, and that's when the myth began and when everybody else started to talk about it because it was such an extraordinary sort of failure in the end. But since then, lots of things have happened in South African cricket and to South African cricketers, to South African cricketers who have decided they have to make their way elsewhere because they can't get into teams in South Africa. All of the other fault lines that are there, coaches being up on charges of tribunals, you know, accusations of racism flying around from the people at the top, going backwards and forwards from white to black, black to white. All of these things, when it really, really comes down to it, are very, very bad in a dressing room that has also got this myth rattling around in their heads anyway. You know, Sean Pollock with the DLS. You know, there's a litany of these things happening. If it's going to go wrong, it will go wrong for South Africa, and they are not together enough to kind of to rise above it.
It's gone on so long that Tristan Stubbs wasn't even born in
1999.
There
must be a couple
He's
that
born
weren't.
in August 2000.
But we know from aspects of English sport, it becomes ingrained in the psyche, and you hit those moments, and suddenly that line pops into everyone's head.
Yeah. In the end, though, it was an amazing tournament for the Dutch. They finished 4th in Group 2, which means they'll qualify automatically for the next T20 World Cup, which I think is the best performance by an associate since Kenya in 2003. I spoke to their opening bowler, Fred Klaassen, this morning about their campaign and how they ended up performing much, much better this year than last year. Among other things, he mentions how the exposure they got from being the only non-test playing nation in the ODI World Cup Super League helped them out. Here is that chat with Klaassen. First off, Fred, how are you doing? How are you feeling after that win against Africa? What was the mood in the camp like? South Africa were arguably favourites for the World Cup a week ago. Now you've beaten them, finished in the top 8 of a World Cup and have qualified for the next World Cup automatically, which is some achievement.
Yeah, it was a lovely way to finish the tournament, obviously. I mean, it was a little bit, maybe if we'd played better in that Bangladesh game, we may have a shot to go to the semis, which... we talked about as a team actually making semi-finals. I know our coach's goal was to win 5 games of the World Cup, including the first round. Obviously, we got 4, which was still a pretty good effort. But getting to the semis probably seemed like a very optimistic goal for our team. But one of those ones once we started talking about it, and once it was sort of we put it out there, it was sort of like actually the boys. It wasn't actually. As ridiculous as maybe it might sound to some others. We ended up, the fact that we did beat South Africa in the end meant that we're only sort of one game away from actually making it.
Finishing 8th is the best performance by an associate country, I think, in 19 years since Kenya got to the semi-finals in 2003. Where do you think that belief came from? Because, as you say, you really weren't that far off actually threatening for a semi-final place.
Yeah, I think the squad that we had a very good side. I mean, we didn't actually play to our potential throughout the tournament. Probably our most complete game was the South African game. We obviously struggled a bit with the batting in the middle order. We didn't really get the runs that we would like to, and a few of those games were quite close that they probably shouldn't have been. So I think that just showed that sort of the capability of our side against South Africa there. So it's probably a little bit of a shame that we couldn't put sort of complete performances like that for more of the games.
And obviously, Netherlands are part of the ODI World Cup Super League and get, I guess, exposure that other associate nations don't quite get at the moment. Do you think that has helped the development of your side? I know you don't get to play a full strength side every time you go out there, but has playing the big boys for the last couple of years helped, do you think, even though that's a different format?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think especially for the guys that are domestically based in the Netherlands, they got that exposure through quite a few different series there, which is great. Those players they're good enough to play at that level, but I think it's actually the experience of getting it and the taste of it makes a big difference. And actually that gives you that self-belief, that belief that you actually know that you're good enough to be at that level. I think that's really important. So for guys like Vikram Singh and Sharif Ahmed, even Buster later as well, to sort of play quite a few games, a lot of series, and get that experience, meant that when they came up and playing in a World Cup, which has other pressure to it as well, in Australia, conditions that none of us had really played in, but it meant that we were in a better position to compete as well.
And you mentioned playing conditions that you guys haven't really played much in before. How do you go about preparing for playing in Australia when you haven't had that match experience?
Well, I think Perth was probably the most difficult one, just with the pace and balance, and we only had one training session at the Optus Stadium, and I think that's probably where we were most. That game was probably outplayed the most, I'd say, which was probably the flattest I felt after all the games, just because I personally, I didn't think I played very well, but I felt like we were never really in it. That Pakistan bowling attack on that wicket, they had 4 guys bowling over 140 k's an hour, and they did pretty much blow our batting order. So yeah, I mean, it would have been nice maybe to have a couple more days in Perth. I mean, our coach Samuel, even Dan Christian, kept telling us how nice Perth is to bat once you get in. We unfortunately didn't get to experience that. I mean, it's just that extra provided quite a threat, obviously.
And there are a few results in the tournament where teams that didn't qualify automatically for the Super 12s beat some of the bigger sides. Did you, when you saw results like Scotland beating West Indies, Zimbabwe beating Pakistan, for example, did that give you like an extra sense of belief that actually the gap between the sides, even though they've got all these IPL players, etc., isn't actually as big as you might have previously thought?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The nature of T20 cricket as well. I mean, we've seen upsets over the years and things like that. Rather than actually, it probably motivated me more because I felt that our team was as good, if not better, than those teams that were making the upsets, and we naturally upset one of the big sides. I mean, we beat Zimbabwe, which obviously test playing nation, but to take obviously Ireland beating England and Namibia beating Sri Lanka and Scotland winning as well, I sort of was like, that's what was quite nice. It was almost satisfying when we did beat South Africa. It was like, yeah, well, like I don't know, I've never been part of a big upset like that. So yeah, personally, it was great to be part of.
But then does planning for those games differ, I guess, to most of your fixtures? Was there like a plan amongst you guys do you have a score in mind of if we get to 160, we really back our bowling attack to cause them problems? Or was it any different to how you'd prepare for a normal game, I guess?
I think we went into that game with nothing to lose. Obviously, if we won, I have to qualify for the next World Cup. But and we had an amazing tour anyway. We hadn't necessarily all gone our way, but I think by then we were just playing to enjoy ourselves, which can be quite an important factor. I think obviously South Africa had all the pressure on them, and with their historic results at other World Cups, we could probably play on that a little bit. As the game sort of unravelled, as I said, we didn't really bat very well throughout the tournament. But you could tell from the side, even after sort of 3 South African taking a wicket and Steph and Max had got us off to a lovely start, you could sort of sense sort of the body language sort of drop a little bit with the South Africans. I actually, for South African standard, they probably didn't bowl as well as they wanted to in the power play. It was interesting. Obviously, Nortje came away with very good figures, but him opting for slower balls quite early was quite interesting. And we got, we had a nice power play, and we managed to put a nice sort of batting innings together. And Colin Ackerman obviously finished it off very well and got us to a competitive total. So, I mean, we always knew that our bowling was strong enough to compete with all the teams. I suppose I sort of felt as the bowler, like, okay, the batters are standing up now. It's time for the bowlers, and just because the expectation there, sometimes that that can play against you. But again, we managed to take sort of wickets throughout and keep the pressure on in terms of the required run rate, and then at the end took wickets at the correct times, and it made it harder and harder for them.
What was the chat in the huddle just before you went out?
But obviously, Scotty just sort of said, we've set a good score here, and if we put these batters under pressure, we'll see where it goes. It wasn't about we have to take wickets here or there, or we have to take these sort of guys down. It's sort of, sustained pressure is just by hitting lines and lengths. And funny enough, although my figures came out all right, I probably didn't actually bowl as well as I wanted to in terms of my consistency. But again, T20 can play like that. You can take wickets with, ball with like not amazing balls, and it's nice to get a big wicket like Quinton de Kock so early. He's a very dangerous player. Their whole batting lineup is dangerous. Rousseau and guys like this, but probably because we had made a sort of competitive total to chase down. That obviously played into our hands because they were under pressure. You probably saw someone like Riley Rousseau not being able to play with as much freedom as he had, during the tournament or even in the Blast, where he had an outstanding tournament. He's a very dangerous batsman. One of the batsmen that I don't enjoy bowling to, just because of how good he is. So you're able to play with that scoreboard pressure and the fact that it was a must win for them. They have a far bigger expectation than we have. From not only from the cricketing world but just their nation as well.
And you mentioned kind of like how experienced a lot of your players are. A lot of you guys play county cricket. How important is that you guys playing this much county cricket as development for you guys? As you say, you play against players like Rousseau all the time.
Yeah, I mean, experience-wise, that's great. Where probably the catch-22 is that we don't get to play as that squad as much as sort of other teams do. So, I mean, that's why it's finished now, but we were away together, sort of guys sort of added to the group. But for me, it was about 2 months, and it's almost like a bit of an empty feeling now. Now that it's all over, there's obviously a lot of highs and lows throughout the tournament, throughout the trip. But now that it's all over, it's quite an abrupt sort of ending, and you sort of don't. It's sort of always a bit okay. Well, when are we going to get another tour with that? With the same sort of squad when everyone's available. So yeah, I mean, you can't have everything. So obviously the experience that brings from the likes of Roelof van Merwe and Colin Ackerman, Paul Van Meekeren obviously playing, Tim van der Gooden, Logan playing in New Zealand. It's great for the experience, and obviously we have a couple of guys there that sort of grew up in South Africa, so they know some of the guys personally, the opposition personally, and that helps. So that plays into our hands. So yeah, I mean, there's good and bad things that come.
Yeah, I guess you say you don't get to be full strength that often. That ODI series against England that was on TV, for example, you had a lot of first choice players not around. So how does the build up to a tournament? How is that affected by? Do you feel like you're building towards something as a group when not everyone can actually be there for a lot of the time?
Yeah, I think, as I say, the nature. I mean, if we talk about the build up to this World Cup, comparing probably it was a little bit of an aftermath or a hindsight of last year's World Cup, which was really disappointing. We had a really poor preparation. It was obviously still COVID bubbles and highly effective at that. And we lost 3 games quite convincingly, which for me personally, this tournament was definitely redemption, and the preparation was outstanding. We started in South Africa as about 8, and we when we got to Adelaide initially, was the first place we got to as the pre-tournament. It added more and more until our final place we were before we got to Melbourne was Brisbane, and that's when the whole squad finally got together. So we were able to play games and train and get used to the facilities and just enjoy each other's company, which is really important along tours like that. And I think it just made a massive difference being able to going outside hotels to enjoy each other's company rather than be stuck in team rooms and hotels and things.
And then just finally, how does it feel at the end of it? A World Cup in these massive stadiums in Australia against some of the biggest and best teams in the world, and you guys have done really, really well. Like, if it was a straight knockout tournament, you guys would have qualified for the quarterfinals. Like, that's an extremely cool achievement. What does that feel like at the end of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a surreal experience for me personally. I think the high points for me, one, when we first qualified for 12s, thanks to a UAE win over Namibia. Secondly, playing against India at the SCG in front of a full crowd was quite outrageous and surreal experience, which is something I always remember. And then and then being in South Africa 2 days. Those are probably the highest points of the tour. And you don't play in a World Cup in Australia. It doesn't get much better than that, and grounds that I've watched on TV, and even grew up, lived a little bit in Sydney when I was growing up. So I went to the SCG a lot. So actually playing there, changing rooms, even using the practice facilities was just amazing.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for your time, Fred. Well done again on the tournament, and have a great winter. Elsewhere, England World Cup winner Jenny Gunn has announced her retirement from professional cricket. Gunn retired from international cricket 3 years ago after playing more than 250 times for England. She played a crucial innings in that semi-final win against South Africa in 2017, helping England win that by 2 wickets with 2 balls left. And then in the final, she hit 25 unbeaten with the bat to help England to a competitive score before going none for 17 off her 7 overs with the ball in that famously close game. So a fantastic career comes to an end. Also in the women's game this week, the ECB released the latest batch of central contracts. 18 players were awarded contracts, including first contracts for Lauren Bell, Alice Capsey, Charlotte Dean, Freya Kemp, Emma Lamb and Izzy Wong. I've seen the point made by a few people that although the Lisa Kiteley reign wasn't littered with silverware, her legacy will be bringing through this very exciting new generation of players who are already making an impact.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Absolutely. There was a sense of a slight sort of drudgery, I guess, before the Kiteley era, that it was the same personnel, often in certain places underperforming or treading water at best. She definitely came in and shook it up a little bit. And I think Heather, as well as the skipper, became more open to that, recognised that the team needed to evolve, needed a bit more physicality in there as well. And I thought when Anya called it a day, it was interesting what she said herself, that the game had moved on and had become a more athletic, more physical game. And you see that in those names, they're real athletes there. And in Lauren Bell and Izzy Wong, you've got 2 good young quicks. And obviously you've got a batch of batters there that can really change the game, certainly evolve the game on again. It's good, I think. And it's an exciting collection of names. It's not just impressive that we now have the money that's been siphoned to expand the game, but the personnel that are benefiting from it.
And a lot of people who have played for England and you have had central contracts in the past are still within the game in the pressure contracts. So like the regions are releasing who are their full-time players. And you're like, 4 or 5 of them have already played for England.
I think also Kiteley Kiteley said herself, she's felt much more comfortable picking these players because they've had exposure in the 100. And before that, we knew there were these exciting young players, but they didn't really have the opportunity to show they were ready. So Kiteley has done that, but I think she's also, that's just been the circumstances that have been around while she's been coach.
Big news about the West Indies tour as well. Good news, I think.
Yeah, so they go out in December. Yeah.
So 3 ODIs and 5 T20s have been announced next month, and the T20 World Cup is just around the corner. It's in February, so not long to go until that. In a county game, there's a lot of county news that kind of just filters through the week, and hopefully I've gathered anything. Shout if you think I missed something. Gareth Batty has unsurprisingly been appointed head coach at Surrey after he won the championship as interim coach. Matthew Maynard has effectively been removed as Glamorgan's white ball coach after they had a not very good year in the Blast. Sussex have signed West Indies quick Jaden Seals, which is a serious signing, especially given how much they struggled with the ball last year. And Glamorgan have secured the services of Harry Podmore from Kent, who's got an excellent first-class record and done very well in Division 1 in the past. Back on to the T20 World Cup, bit of news from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka have begun an inquiry into further incidents alleged to have taken place during the men's T20 World Cup in Australia following Danushka Gunithalaka's arrest on rape charges. A 3-person panel has been appointed to investigate all those incidents. There are various alleged incidents that have come to their attention. No details have been given on the nature of the other incidents being investigated. Joe, there is a new magazine out, and it is new in more than one way.
New look, revamped, whatever you want to use. Yeah, it looks
it's
nice
very sexy
for YouTube viewers. we've chosen an odd time of year to do a New Look magazine. Phil and I have realised.
That's our style.
Not least because Phil was in Mozambique for half of it, but we've done it. We've got it out there, and it's really good. I mean, I would say that, but it is good. We've got, I think I counted 6 new regular features in there. We've got a new kind of star interviewer in Mel Farrell, the Aussie broadcaster and writer.
Love you, Farrelly.
And the cover feature we've gone with is looking ahead to England's Test tour of Pakistan and the kind of white ball infused batting unit that they've picked. So we've interviewed Ben Duckett, Keaton Jennings and Harry Brook, and we profiled, Liam Livingstone and Will Jacks. These 5
that's
players.
Our reach, just pick 3 England players, just get them on the phone, meet them up for coffees.
And the theme is obviously that England are going out to play in the subcontinent in pretty much a way that no side has ever tried before, certainly no English side. And we don't know how it's going to go. And when I'm speaking to Ben Duckett and he says, when I'm facing a spin bowler, my sweep shot is basically my forward defence. And you've got...
Sounds good.
It sounds good. It could go either way.
Yeah.
That's a brave thing to say before a tour in Asia.
Well, I suppose the only thing is that pitches don't really turn.
And that's a crucial point he was making in that as well.
It isn't like playing, obviously he made his test debut in Bangladesh and, ragging square. Was it Mehdi Hassan with 19? How many wickets did he take in that test match? It was a lot anyway, 16 or something. And it was turning square. Now, in India, it turned square as well. Totally legitimately so as well, I thought. From
okay.
But in Pakistan, it tends not to spin a great deal. Even the wrist spinners struggle to get it off the straight. So, there might be some genius in it.
And Ducky said he said very little bounce as well, which is obviously also key, allows him to play that sweep shot without too much fear.
And he played magnificently well. I spoke to him a couple of times. We were out there, and at one time I sort of said, this is a terrific little sort of advertisement for your skills on your CV. He says, what, to become a subcontinent specialist? I said, well, you got to, sort of like, oh man.
Well, it was on that tour, he said to me, it was on that tour that Rob Key spoke to him, because Rob Key was in Pakistan at the same time, right? And said to him, look, how do you feel about potentially opening in the upcoming test series? So I think probably most people would have Jennings as favourite to open with Crawley, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go...
I mean, the only issue I have with that is that the first 10 overs or so with Shaheen and Naseem Shah are not going to be a picnic. That's not going to be fun. And that's why being an opening batter and having the technique and whatever to get through that is going to be just as valuable as guys being able to bosh it around in the middle order. So.
And Jennings has got Test hundreds in Asia, and it would be the more sensible move, but that might be exactly the reason they don't do it.
And having done the job before, I get a little bit defensive over the idea that anyone can just go up and open the batting, because that's not the case.
In Jennings' favour, I've got a feeling that Duckett might get the nod, by the way. But in Jennings' favour is that last summer, and I know Duckett made big runs as well, albeit in Division 2, but when Jennings got in on good tracks, he did make heavy runs, didn't he? He made the triple, he made the 199 in the last game. So if we are thinking that these pitches are going to be flat, certainly for 4 days and more, then Jennings is an accumulator.
And no slouch, right? I mean, once he gets in, he scores fluently enough. Not Duckett levels, but...
Yeah, but I go with you. I do have a feeling that Duckett, being the more adventurous pick, might just appeal to them. But we shall see, and obviously they'll have a practice game or two to see how it goes.
But Harry Brook... So I'm just trying to think where England finished up. So Harry Brook played for Johnny, didn't he, at batting at 5.
And he's almost certainly...
He's going to play. Ben will stay at 6. So really, the only real spot that's been opened up, presuming they stick largely with what they had in the first place, is the opening spot.
Yeah. Then I guess there's a possibility that Livingstone could maybe play at 7, folks at 8.
I think there's a reasonable chance that given that they've picked so few seamers, just from squad makeup, I think they're going to play Jacks at 8.
Right.
That's what I think they'll do.
So folks at 7, Jacks at 8, Livingstone on the. And
I think Jacks has batted at 8. For Surrey this season.
Yeah, he has, and I would have Jacks. I think Jacks is above Livingstone. Yeah, really. I mean, he's had
as a bowler.
Well, just in terms of in the pecking order, because he's had a proper red ball season. He's helped Surrey win a championship. He's actually done that job of being a holding spinner. Livingstone hasn't really done that in red ball cricket. He's got some talent there clearly, but that would be an even bigger punt. But again, that might be exactly the reason they go for it, because this is Stokes and McCullum, and you never know.
What else is in the magazine?
Loads of stuff. I did a piece on Yorkshire's relegation and what went wrong, on the field, but naturally it obviously takes in some off-field stuff as well.
How many pages was that?
It was 4. It was 4. It could have been a lot more. Could have been a lot more if Yorkshire actually let you speak to some people as well. Always tough on that one. Thank you to Jordan Thompson for taking the time to speak to me when he didn't have to. That was very kind of him in difficult circumstances.
Could I just interrupt you there on the Yorkshire thing? So this morning, Roger Hutton, the former chair, has said that he won't engage with the public disciplinary hearing that's going to take place at the end of the month. He says he has no confidence in the authority of the ECB whatsoever. And so he says that he's given information privately, but won't front up in what's now going to be this public hearing. So it's a further layer of misery on top of what's going to be a pretty explosive couple of days come the end of November. And look, this story will continue to run and become ever more ugly and contorted as it goes, I'm afraid.
Yep.
Other stuff in there. Got a really good column from Lawrence Booth on the ICC sponsorship deal with Saudi oil giants Aramco.
That was excellent.
Where he's gone in quite hard. Obviously, we've got COP27 started yesterday. Is cricket doing its bit? Quite emphatically, no. And he's got quite a lot of examples in his column of what cricket could be doing. As he says at the end, cricket can't save the world, but it can do its bit. And at the moment, it's falling far short of that. And then my favourite piece of the magazine is actually interviewing the man sitting opposite me, but also his dad. So I've got a new feature on what it's like to be the parent of a pro cricketer, experiencing the highs and lows, being involved, sometimes having to sit back and watch it unfold. So I spoke to Alan, Mark's dad, had a lovely chat with him, went to Mark, saw how their stories tallied up, which, in most cases they did. There were a few points of disagreement. And that's going to be an ongoing series. So I'm going to speak to Mo and Ali's dad, Munir, Joe Root's parents, Matt and Helen, and see how that kind of plays out over the next few months. But it's good fun to do. And you're talking, not in the case of Alan, because obviously he's a professional cricketer himself, played for England. He's done lots of interviews, but I'm looking forward to speaking to people who don't usually do an interview and can hear the role they played. And, speaking to Matt Root, for instance, being the dad of the greatest batsman in the world, possibly England's greatest ever, that must be a kind of pinch yourself thing, right? How's that on a day-to-day basis? I'm looking forward to hearing some stories from him.
Did you get Dan Lawrence's dad on? He was great on TMS.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah.
Other things, it is a belter, this one. Jim Wallace has done a good piece on the evolution of fielding from Colin Bland through to now. And Matt Roller, who's starting to write for us a bit more, he's the Cricinfo associate editor, and he gets a shout out on this show.
Well,
every week,
he's been on a few dailies.
Yeah.
He's on more than me recently, to be honest.
He's written an excellent thing about, if you like, origin stories of T20 players and how the T20 games democratized the game and brought the game, spread it out into the outposts that would have been previously disdained upon or ignored. Well, now you're getting these stories that are coming through of cricketers who make their way via the backwaters to stardom, and he's done a really beautiful job on that. Cameron Ponsonby interviewed Harry Brook as well, so there's a good collection of names, and we've got a spruced up new gear section, equipment, best stuff of the year, discounted as well, by the way, from Pro Direct, and a new coaching section as well. Now, as you know, because you've been involved in this, we've got now a roster of WCM coaches, I guess you'd call them, the team of coaches from, help me out, Matt Parkinson to Keaton Jennings to
Ollie Pope, Mark Ramprakash, Tash Farron, Lydia Greenway,
Alex Tudor.
Yeah. Toby Radford, the batting specialist as
well.
John
Simpson's our keeper.
John Simpson.
Got pretty much an 11 there. Decent side, actually.
Yeah.
So important to say, we are going to be getting masterclasses from these coaches, but also they're going to be answering your questions. So I don't know if you've already done a plug for this on the pod. You probably have.
Before, but
so if you've got any coaching queries with the stuff you're working on the nets over the winter that you want some help on your bat and your bowling, your keeping, your fielding, then email us at the usual address or tweet us, and we'll put the best questions to these coaches.
And you can send in. We talked about sending in videos as well. We can show these guys.
Absolutely,
videos.
Yeah. Much as you can throw at us.
Cool. As ever, you can get the latest magazine, which is out later this week at wisden.com/shop. That is all we have time for on today's show. Cheers, Phil. Cheers, Joe. Cheers, Mark. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow after the first T20 World Cup semi-final. Cheers for listening.